Joseph Solis stood in Christina Frausto's mansion, feeling completely out of place. The wealthy widow handed him divorce papers from her late billionaire husband and told him to read page 3. When Joseph did, he discovered something that changed everything. His estranged half-brother Ricardo had secretly named him the sole trustee of a $127 million family trust meant for Joseph's daughter Maya. The handwritten note on page 3 meant Joseph was now responsible for a fortune he never asked for and enemies he never knew existed. His simple life as a struggling handyman was over, and he had to decide whether to fight for an inheritance that could save his daughter or run from people powerful enough to have killed his brother. Before we continue, tell us where in the world you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far our stories reach and how they resonate across the globe. Joseph received an unexpected call from a lawyer asking him to meet Christina Frausto, the widow of his half-brother Ricardo, whom he hadn't seen in over 20 years. Joseph was confused because he barely remembered Ricardo. They'd only met once at their father's funeral when Joseph was 12. The lawyer insisted it was urgent and involved Ricardo's estate. Joseph agreed to meet her, though he was nervous about entering the world of wealthy people he'd always avoided. When Joseph arrived at Christina's massive Bel Air estate, he felt intimidated by the luxury surrounding him. His work boots and cheap clothes looked pathetic next to the marble floors and expensive furniture. Christina appeared and surprised him by being younger and less cold than he expected. She explained that she and Ricardo had been divorcing before his death 6 months ago in a suspicious car accident. Then she handed Joseph the divorce papers and told him to read page 3. The page contained a handwritten addition to the legal document. Ricardo had created a family trust worth $127 million and named Joseph as the sole trustee. The trust was meant to benefit children of the Solis bloodline, which meant Joseph's 8-year-old daughter Maya. Ricardo had also given Joseph the right to take his seat on the board of directors at Frausto Industries. Joseph was shocked because this meant his brother had been watching him for years, knew about Maya, and had planned his inheritance specifically for them. Joseph couldn't believe what he was reading. He asked Christina why she was telling him this, and she explained that Ricardo's business partners were going to fight the trust in court. These powerful men didn't want an outsider controlling Ricardo's money. Christina warned Joseph that they might have even killed Ricardo to protect their interests. She gave Joseph her phone number and told him to think carefully about whether he wanted to claim the inheritance, because accepting it would make him a target. Joseph left the mansion in shock and drove home to his cramped apartment where Maya was waiting. That night, he couldn't sleep as he thought about what the money could do for his daughter. Maya wore shoes that didn't fit, ate cheap food, and attended an overcrowded school because Joseph could barely afford rent on his handyman wages. The trust could change everything for her, but it also came with danger from people who had unlimited resources and no morals. The next morning, Joseph received a phone call from Lawrence Pemberton, the chief legal counsel for Frausto Industries. Pemberton tried to sound friendly, but Joseph could hear the threat underneath. The lawyer claimed the handwritten codicil was probably fake and that Joseph could be charged with fraud for trying to claim the money. Then Pemberton offered Joseph $500,000 to walk away and sign paperwork, giving up all rights to the trust. Joseph refused and hung up. Within minutes, Joseph received a text from Pemberton offering the settlement again and saying, "Think about your daughter." Joseph realized these people already knew everything about him and Maya. He felt angry that they were threatening him and offering such a small amount when Ricardo had left $127 million. Joseph blocked the number and called Christina to tell her what happened. Christina wasn't surprised and asked Joseph to come back to her house immediately. She warned him not to drive his own truck because the board members were probably having him followed. She sent a car with a driver who took complicated routes and kept checking for anyone tailing them. When Joseph arrived, Christina took him to her private office and explained that she'd found listening devices hidden throughout her house after Ricardo died. These people were serious and would do anything to control the money. Christina then told Joseph something that made him emotional. She revealed that Ricardo had been secretly helping Joseph for years. When Joseph's mother was dying of cancer and left behind huge medical bills, it was Ricardo who anonymously paid the entire $300,000 debt. Joseph had always thought it was forgiven by a charitable hospital program, but it was his brother taking care of him from a distance. Ricardo had hired investigators to check on Joseph periodically and learn about his struggles as a single father after Maya's mother abandoned them. This information made Joseph see Ricardo differently. His brother hadn't been cold or uncaring. He'd been watching over Joseph but didn't know how to reach out after so many years apart. Ricardo had felt guilty about their family splitting up and about having advantages Joseph never had. When Ricardo learned about Maya, he decided to set up the trust to give her opportunities. Christina explained that Ricardo had been planning to contact Joseph directly, but died before he could. Christina gave Joseph a key to a safety deposit box at First Pacific Bank downtown. She said Ricardo had left specific instructions for the box to be accessible only to Joseph after certain legal matters were settled. Inside would be more information about the trust and Ricardo's plans. Christina urged Joseph to see what was in the box before making his final decision. Joseph left and went to visit his neighbor Rosa, an older woman who often watched Maya when Joseph worked late. He told Rosa everything and showed her the divorce papers. Rosa was shocked by the amount of money but told Joseph he needed to accept it for Maya's sake. She revealed that Maya needed glasses but hadn't told Joseph because the girl knew her father was struggling with money. Rosa said Maya often went hungry and worried constantly about bills because she overheard Joseph's phone calls with creditors. Rosa insisted that taking the inheritance wasn't about pride. It was about giving Maya the childhood she deserved. Joseph went to First Pacific Bank with Christina's driver accompanying him for security. At the bank, he used the key to access safety deposit box 847. Inside, he found several items that would change everything. A sealed letter addressed to him in Ricardo's handwriting. A fully charged tablet computer. Folders containing detailed information about the Frausto Industries board members, financial documents showing all the trust assets, and a single photograph. The photograph showed two boys at a park. Teenage Ricardo in expensive clothes, standing awkwardly next to 12-year-old Joseph in a Dodgers t-shirt. It was from their father's funeral, the only photo of them together that existed. Joseph remembered that brief moment when someone had suggested taking their picture before Ricardo's mother called him away. Seeing it now made Joseph sad for all the years they'd lost. Joseph opened Ricardo's letter and read his brother's explanation for everything. Ricardo wrote that he'd made his fortune out of anger being poor and watching his mother work as a housekeeper for rich families. The money had made him powerful, but not happy. 3 years ago, when Ricardo learned about Maya's existence, he'd hired investigators just to see photos of her. He'd watched Joseph struggling, but saw that Joseph had figured out something Ricardo never could, how to be content with enough and how to be a good father. But Ricardo had also seen Joseph and Maya living in poverty, with the little girl wearing shoes too small, because Joseph couldn't afford new ones. That's when Ricardo decided to create the trust. He wrote that it wasn't charity, but family taking care of family. Ricardo knew Joseph would feel he didn't deserve the money, but he insisted Maya deserved it. The letter warned that the board members would fight for control and gave Joseph tools to battle them, passwords, account access, and detailed information on each board member's secrets and vulnerabilities. The letter ended with Ricardo apologizing for not being a real brother, for wasting 20 years on pride and fear when he could have known Joseph and Maya. He asked Joseph to be a better man than him, and to tell Maya someday that he wished he'd known her. Joseph then found a video file on the tablet labeled "For Joseph." He played it and saw Ricardo sitting in an office, looking tired and older than in the photos. Ricardo spoke directly to the camera, explaining that if Joseph was watching this, something had happened to him. Ricardo mentioned receiving threats lately and said he wasn't sure if he'd die of natural causes. He apologized again for not being brave enough to be a real brother and told Joseph to use the money wisely to protect Maya. The video ended with Ricardo looking sad and saying that Joseph deserved better and Maya deserved everything. Joseph sat in the small bank room processing everything. His brother had loved him from a distance, had taken care of him secretly, and had built this entire plan to provide for Maya. Joseph felt grief for the relationship they never had and anger at the people who might have killed Ricardo. He gathered all the materials from the safety deposit box and made his decision. On the way out of the bank, he told the driver to make a stop at Maya's school because she needed new glasses, and he was done pretending they couldn't afford things. "Listen, if you're still here, it means you're invested. You want to see what happens next. But here's the reality. Most people watch stories like this and scroll away without subscribing. They enjoy it, then vanish. If this story actually matters to you, if you genuinely care about how it ends, hit that subscribe button. It only takes a second. Otherwise, you'll probably forget this channel exists and miss all the other incredible stories I share. Over the next 2 days, Joseph prepared for war with Christina's help. She had a tailor come to fit him for expensive suits, so he could look the part of a wealthy trustee. She hired tutors to teach him about corporate finance, board procedures, and the specific businesses within the Frausto empire. Joseph studied the folders from Ricardo's safety deposit box, learning about each board member's background, business dealings, and secrets. The tablet Ricardo left contained detailed evidence of corruption within Frausto Industries. Several board members had been using company resources for personal investments, falsifying reports to shareholders, and even engaging in insider trading. Ricardo had been collecting proof for months before his death, apparently planning to clean house. Now this evidence belonged to Joseph, giving him leverage in the coming fight. Christina explained the legal situation clearly. The board would challenge the handwritten codicil in court, claiming Ricardo wasn't mentally competent when he wrote it or that Christina had manipulated him. They'd argue that Joseph had no experience managing wealth and would destroy the value of the trust. Their real goal was to have the court appoint a professional trustee they could control, which would let them access the trust assets for their own benefit. But Christina had been preparing her own strategy. She'd hired the best trust litigation attorney in California, a woman named Diana Chun, who'd never lost a case involving estate disputes. Diana had already filed preliminary paperwork establishing Joseph's legal standing as named trustee. She'd also obtained sworn depositions from Ricardo's personal lawyer, an accountant confirming that Ricardo was completely lucid and deliberate when creating the trust codicil. The board members could file their challenge, but Diana was confident they'd lose in court. The real problem, Christine explained, wasn't a legal battle but the personal danger. She believed Ricardo's car accident wasn't random. The police investigation had been suspiciously brief, ruling it an accident within days despite evidence of possible brake line tampering. Christina had hired a private investigator who found that one of the board members, Thomas Whitmore, had connections to the mechanic shop where Ricardo's car had been serviced a day before his death. Nothing was proven, but the coincidences were disturbing. Joseph asked why Christina was risking herself to help him when she'd already gotten her divorce settlement. She could walk away and live comfortably without getting involved in this fight. Christina's answer surprised him. She said that Ricardo had been the best person she'd ever known despite his emotional distance. He deserved better than to die mysteriously and have his legacy destroyed by greedy men. More importantly, Christina had realized she had more money than she could ever spend but nothing meaningful to do with it. Helping Joseph win this battle and watching Maya get the future Ricardo wanted for her, that meant something. Christina also revealed her own story. She'd grown up wealthy but emotionally neglected by parents who cared more about social status than their daughter. She'd married Ricardo partly to escape her family, and they built a partnership based on mutual respect rather than passion. Ricardo had taught her to think about what really mattered in life. Now that he was gone, she wanted to honor that lesson by fighting for something that mattered. The board meeting was scheduled for the following week. Joseph would attend in person to assert his claim to Ricardo's board seat and present himself as the trust's legitimate trustee. Christina warned that the board members would try to intimidate him, question his intelligence and capabilities, and make him feel unworthy. They'd use every psychological trick to make him back down. Joseph needed to stay calm, stick to the script Diana Chin prepared, and remember that he had rights they couldn't legally deny. Joseph spent his evenings with Maya, not telling her anything about the inheritance yet. He didn't want to get her hopes up until everything was settled, but he did take her to get new glasses, telling her he'd gotten a bonus at work. Maya was so happy she cried, which broke Joseph's heart because it was just glasses, something she should have had months ago without it being a big deal. Rosa noticed the changes in Joseph and asked if he'd made his decision. He told her yes. He was fighting for the trust because Maya deserved it, and because running away wouldn't actually make them safer. The board members already knew about him and Maya. Refusing the money wouldn't make them forget or leave him alone. The only way forward was to claim what Ricardo had left him and use it to build a protected life for his daughter. The night before the board meeting, Joseph couldn't sleep. He put on one of his new suits and looked at himself in the mirror. He looked like a different person, polished, professional, like someone who belonged in a boardroom. But underneath, he was still just a handyman who fixed leaky faucets and replaced broken deck boards. He felt like a fraud. Then Joseph thought about Maya sleeping in the next room and about Ricardo's video message saying Joseph deserved better. He thought about the photo of two boys who should have been brothers but never got the chance. He thought about rich men in boardrooms who'd kill for money and thought they could scare him into walking away. Joseph had spent his whole life being invisible, staying small, avoiding attention from people with power. That's how he'd survived. But invisibility had also kept him trapped in poverty and fear. Maybe it was time to be seen. Maybe it was time to stop letting powerful people decide what he deserved. The next morning, Christina's driver picked up Joseph at 6 a.m. They drove to downtown Los Angeles, to a gleaming skyscraper that housed Frausto Industries headquarters. Joseph rode the elevator to the 35th floor, carrying Ricardo's tablet and folders in a leather briefcase Christina had given him. Diana Chin met him in the lobby outside the boardroom, reviewing the strategy one final time. The plan was simple. Joseph would present his credentials as named trustee and request formal recognition of his status. The board would challenge him. Diana would present the legal documentation, proving everything was legitimate. The board would either accept him or formally file their court challenge, which Diana wanted because it would force everything into the open where their corruption could be exposed. The boardroom was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a table long enough to seat 20 people. 6 men were already there, all wearing expensive suits and watching Joseph with expressions ranging from curious to hostile. Joseph recognized them from the folders: Thomas Whitmore, the probable murderer; Lawrence Pemberton, the lawyer who'd threatened him; and 4 other board members who'd been stealing from the company for years. Thomas Whitmore stood at the head of the table, tall and silver-haired, with a commanding presence of someone used to being obeyed. He looked at Joseph like he was something unpleasant tracked in on someone's shoe. He didn't offer to shake hands. He just gestured to a chair at the far end of the table, the position of least importance, and told Joseph to sit. Joseph sat. Diana Chun sat beside him. The 6 board members spread out on both sides of the table, creating a visual intimidation, Joseph and his lawyer alone at one end facing a united front. Whitmore began speaking, explaining that they were here to discuss the alleged codicil to Ricardo's divorce settlement. He used the word alleged like it was an insult. Diana Chin interrupted immediately, stating clearly that the codicil was legally executed, properly witnessed, and filed with the court. She placed certified copies in front of each board member. Whitmore barely glanced at his copy before dismissing it, saying their legal team had concerns about Ricardo's mental state when he supposedly wrote it. Joseph had been told to stay quiet and let Diana handle everything. But sitting there listening to these men dismiss his brother's final wishes made him angry. These were the people who'd worked with Ricardo, who'd made fortunes off his investments, who'd maybe even killed him. And now, they were claiming he'd been crazy. Joseph stood up. Diana looked surprised but didn't stop him. He walked slowly around the table, looking at each board member as he spoke. He told them he'd spent 2 days reading about their careers, their achievements, their public reputations. They were all successful men who'd built impressive businesses. Then he opened Ricardo's tablet and started reading their secrets out loud. He told them about Thomas Whitmore's offshore accounts and falsified tax returns, about Lawrence Pemberton's affair with a client that violated ethics rules, about board member David Chen's fake credentials on his resume, about Marcus Wellington's insider trading that the SEC hadn't discovered yet. One by one, Joseph laid out the evidence Ricardo had collected, watching their faces change from arrogant to nervous to afraid. Joseph explained that Ricardo had been planning to clean house before he died. His brother had discovered all their corruption and was building a case to remove them from the board and possibly file criminal charges. Joseph suggested that maybe they'd found out about Ricardo's plans. Maybe that's why Ricardo's car had brake problems a day after being serviced at a shop owned by Thomas Whitmore's brother-in-law. The room was completely silent. Whitmore's face had turned red. Pemberton looked like he might be sick. Joseph told him calmly that he didn't want a war. He just wanted what Ricardo had left for his daughter. But if they challenged him in court, he'd release every piece of evidence Ricardo had collected. Prosecutors would be very interested. Shareholders would be very interested. Their wives and families would be very interested. Joseph gave them a choice. Accept him as trustee and board member, or watch their lives explode publicly. He sat back down and waited. Thomas Whitmore stared at Joseph for a long moment, and Joseph could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Finally, Whitmore spoke. He said the board would need time to discuss this privately. Dianachin agreed to 1 hour. Joseph and Diana left the boardroom and waited in an empty office down the hall. Diana was excited, saying Joseph's gamble had been risky but brilliant. The board members would have to accept him now because they couldn't risk exposure. Joseph felt sick to his stomach. He just threatened people who might have committed murder. He wondered if he'd made things more dangerous for Maya. After 45 minutes, they were called back. The board members looked defeated. Thomas Whitmore announced formally that the board accepted Joseph Solis as trustee of the family trust and voted to approve his appointment to Ricardo's former board seat. The vote was unanimous. Joseph had won. 3 months after the board meeting, Joseph's life had transformed in ways he still couldn't fully process. The trust was legally secured in his name with no further challenges. The board members had quietly resigned one by one, replaced by people Christina and Joseph carefully vetted. Thomas Whitmore had left the country suddenly, moving to Monaco before any investigators could question him about Ricardo's death. The others had simply disappeared from public life, their secrets kept quiet in exchange for their silence and departure. Joseph moved Maya out of their cramped apartment into a modest house in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. He wanted something bigger, but Christina had advised him to go slowly, to not change everything at once in ways that might overwhelm Maya or himself. The house had 3 bedrooms, a yard with a tree, and enough space that Maya could have friends over without Joseph feeling embarrassed. Maya adjusted to her new life with the resilience of childhood. She got her glasses, and suddenly the world came into focus for her. She enrolled in a private school where class sizes were small and teachers actually had time for individual students. She made new friends quickly. Joseph watched her bloom, seeing confidence grow in a daughter who'd spent years learning to make herself small and undemanding. But Joseph struggled more than his daughter. He'd quit his handyman work, which felt strange because manual labor had defined him for so long. Christina insisted he needed to focus full-time on learning to manage the trust and serve on a board. She hired financial advisors to teach him about investments, lawyers to explain his fiduciary duties, and business consultants to help him understand the various companies in the trust portfolio. Joseph felt stupid in these meetings at first, surrounded by people using terms he didn't understand. But slowly he learned. He discovered he had good instincts about people and could spot dishonesty easily, skills developed from years of dealing with clients who tried to cheat him on handyman jobs. He learned to read financial statements, to ask tough questions, to push back when advisors talked down to him. The hardest part was telling Maya the truth. Joseph had waited 3 months before sitting her down and explaining that her uncle Ricardo, a man she'd never met, had left them money. Maya was confused at first, asking if they were rich now. Joseph told her they were comfortable, that she'd never have to worry about food or clothes or school, but that money also came with responsibilities. He explained that Ricardo had been a good man who'd made mistakes but tried to fix them at the end. Joseph showed Maya the photograph of the 2 boys at the park and told her about their complicated family history. He wanted her to understand that wealth didn't make people better or worse. It just revealed who they already were. Maya listened carefully and then asked a question that broke Joseph's heart. "Does this mean you won't be tired all the time anymore?" Joseph realized his daughter had spent years watching him exhaust himself working multiple jobs, coming home too tired to play, falling asleep on the couch during movies. She'd learned to expect a father who was physically present but emotionally and physically drained. Now he could actually be the dad she deserved, awake, engaged, available. Christina became a constant presence in their lives. She taught Joseph how to navigate social situations with wealthy people, how to dress appropriately for different events, how to recognize when people were trying to manipulate him. But she also became Maya's friend, taking the girls shopping and to museums and art classes. Joseph watched Christina transform from the severe widow he'd first met into someone softer and happier. One evening, after Maya had gone to bed, Joseph and Christina sat in his new living room drinking wine. Joseph admitted he felt guilty about using Ricardo's money when he'd never done anything to earn it. Christina told him to stop thinking about earning and start thinking about stewarding. The money wasn't a prize for achievement. It was a tool for building the life Ricardo had wanted for his family. Then Christina made a suggestion that surprised Joseph. She proposed they create a foundation using part of the trust's annual income. The foundation would provide support for single parents, helping with rent, medical bills, childcare, education, all the things Joseph had struggled with for years. They could help hundreds of families avoid the desperate poverty Joseph had experienced. It would honor Ricardo's memory by using his wealth for something meaningful. Joseph loved the idea immediately. Over the next month, he and Christina worked with lawyers to establish the Solis Family Foundation. They recruited social workers and financial counselors. They partnered with existing organizations that serve single parents. They set up application processes and criteria for aid. Joseph insisted on being personally involved, reviewing applications, and meeting recipients when possible. The foundation became Joseph's purpose, giving him a reason to manage the trust that went beyond just providing for Maya. He met other single parents struggling exactly like he had struggled. He heard their stories and saw his own past reflected back. Every family they helped felt like honoring Ricardo's final gift and also honoring Joseph's own journey. 6 months after the board meeting, Joseph sat in what had been Ricardo's office at Frausto Industries headquarters. The room had been clear of his brother's personal items, but Joseph had brought back the photograph from the safety deposit box, the 2 boys at the park, and placed it on the desk. He thought about how different his life was now compared to the day Christina had first handed him those divorce papers. He'd been terrified then, overwhelmed, convinced he'd fail. Now, he felt something close to confident. Not because he'd become a different person, but because he'd learned that being a good father and a decent human being mattered more than fancy education or corporate experience. The business of running Frausto Industries and managing the trust was becoming routine. Joseph had good people around him who handled the technical details. His job was providing moral direction and making sure Ricardo's vision for ethical business practices actually happened. It turned out the skills he developed as a struggling handyman, resourcefulness, determination, careful money management, knowing when to ask for help, translated pretty well to managing a fortune. Maya thrived in ways that made Joseph emotional. She joined the science club at school and discovered she loved chemistry. She made the honor roll. She stopped worrying about money and started acting like a regular kid who could dream about the future without fear. Joseph watched her transform and thought about Ricardo's letter saying Maya deserved everything. His brother had been right. Christina and Joseph's relationship evolved into something neither had expected. It started as a partnership built on shared goals, protecting Ricardo's legacy and securing Maya's future. But it deepened into genuine friendship and eventually something more. They moved carefully, both aware of the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. But there was real affection there, built on mutual respect and shared values. 1 year after receiving the divorce papers, Joseph stood in Christina's garden at a small ceremony dedicating the Solis Family Foundation's first community center. Maya stood beside him wearing a new dress, looking proud. Christina gave a speech about Ricardo's vision and Joseph's courage in fighting for it. 100 people attended, families helped by the foundation, business partners, friends. Joseph thought about his brother watching from somewhere, hopefully pleased that his money was being used for good. He thought about the scared handyman who'd walked into a mansion a year ago, convinced he didn't belong anywhere near wealth. That person felt far away now, replaced by someone who'd learned that belonging wasn't about money or background. It was about having purpose and people who mattered. After the ceremony, Joseph, Christina, and Maya went to dinner at a restaurant Joseph would never have entered a year ago. Maya chattered about school and friends, completely comfortable in surroundings that once would have intimidated Joseph. Christina caught Joseph's eye across the table and smiled. They'd built this together, a life that honored the past while creating something new. Joseph thought about Ricardo's final message. Be a better man than me. He didn't know if he'd achieve that, but he was trying. He was using wealth to help people instead of isolating himself with it. He was being the father Ricardo had wished their own father had been. He was building connections instead of hiding from them. The trust was secure. Maya's future was protected. The foundation was helping families escape poverty. Joseph had found unexpected partnership with Christina that might become something deeper. The board members who threatened him were gone, their corruption exposed, and their power broken. Joseph had claimed the legacy Ricardo left him and transformed it into something meaningful. He'd moved from the shadows of invisibility into the light of purpose, and he'd done it while keeping the humble heart that had always defined him. Now he just had the resources to let that heart make a real difference. As they left the restaurant, Maya grabbed Joseph's hand on one side and Christina's on the other, swinging between them like a kid without a care in the world. Joseph looked at his daughter, safe, happy, full of possibilities, and knew that everything he'd fought for had been worth it. Ricardo's gift hadn't just been money. It had been the chance to build the life Joseph had always wanted but never thought possible. The legacy was secured, not just in legal documents and trust accounts, but in the lives being changed and the future being built. Joseph Solis, who'd spent years making himself invisible to survive, had learned to be seen. And what people saw now was exactly who he'd always been, a good father, a decent man, and someone worthy of the second chance his brother had given him. This story teaches that true wealth isn't measured by money alone, but by the courage to accept help, the wisdom to use resources for good, and the strength to step out of invisibility when circumstances demand it. Joseph's journey shows that feeling unworthy of opportunities can trap us in cycles of poverty and fear, while embracing unexpected blessings, even when they come with risks, can transform not just our own lives, but the lives of countless others. The narrative demonstrates that our backgrounds don't define our capabilities, that asking for help isn't weakness but wisdom, and that the greatest legacy we can leave isn't found in bank accounts, but in how we use whatever resources we have to lift others up. Ricardo's mistake was letting fear and pride prevent him from building relationships while he was alive, but his redemption came through ensuring his family would have opportunities he failed to give them personally. The lesson is clear. Don't let shame about your circumstances or fear of judgment prevent you from claiming what's rightfully yours, because sometimes accepting a gift isn't about deserving it. It's about honoring the giver's intentions and using it to create meaning beyond yourself. Before you go, let me ask you something, If this story kept you listening until now, why not subscribe? A lot of people watch. A lot of people enjoy. But most never click that button. Don't just be a viewer. Be part of this, like the video if it hit. Share it with someone who'd love it. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next, and drop a comment telling me your favorite part of the story. I really want to know what stood out to you, though, and be honest. Do you want part 2?